Hello everybody, this is Jonathan Moore with the Hometown Historian channel. We are here today just north of Elizabethtown. I'm not going to give the actual location of the cemetery that I'm in because I really honestly am not sure whether this is a cemetery that fits the description of what I'm about to talk about. And just because of the nature of what I'm talking about, it's one of those things that sort of like what Moonshine Cemetery went through out in Greenpoint. You have a bunch of nutcases that come out and then do all kinds of damage to the cemeteries, and that's the last thing that I want. So even for those of my viewers who are really studious about using Find a Grave app and stuff like that, they've done that before. I know Jay has done that in the past where he hasn't mentioned the cemetery because I had said it's probably better not to say anything because the cemetery hasn't done anything wrong, and the people that have their loved ones buried here haven't done anything wrong either. So it's nothing bad. It's just one of those stories. It's a unique haunted history story that I thought would be really, really cool to talk about. And like I said, I'm not really sure exactly where it is because it could be in two different areas, this cemetery that is applicable. It's called the Seven Elizabeths Cemetery. The story goes that back in the day, which I don't even give an exact date, but I'm assuming because of what it's about, that is probably, the people would have had to lived between like the 1770s, 1760s, maybe even as early as 1750s and to like the 1820s at the latest. There were 7 women that were accused of being witches, and sort of time period wise, it wasn't something that you had happening much later than that. You think about the Salem witch trials, and that was much, much earlier, and you wouldn't have it be that early here. But with the German immigrant population that was coming into this area at that time, it would fit that you would have, like between, like, say, the 1750s and 1820s is when a cemetery, and it'd have to be a cemetery of a certain size, because the gentleman that I talked to, he's the head librarian at Middletown Library, and he had not heard of this story either, and he's like a local historian, really knows his stuff. Brilliant guy. And one of the guys he works with actually writes ghost books, and being in Middletown, because it was said that this was somewhere between Hershey and Middletown, on the way to Harrisburg, which would actually sort of be west of here and north, but they said that he actually heard it was along Route 743 on the way to Elizabethtown, before Route 341. And this is really the only one. There's another one right past 341 that could potentially fit. He had said that he thought it was a smaller, like, family or farm plot, and all the farm family plots that I checked on Find a Grave, none of them had 7 Elizabeths. And the chances of having 7 people named the same first name in a cemetery plot that only has, like, say 15 to 20, which is what's common for those small family plots, the chances of that happening are pretty much nil. So I checked all of those, none of them had that. So this one's large enough and old enough, and it does indeed have 7 Elizabeths in that time period. Has quite a few more, actually. I actually showed that first tombstone, which was pretty unique. It was one of those that's sort of like a family type thing where they just got a stone and scrawled on it. I believe it was this one right here. Now this one is Elizabeth Keller. Died May the 1st, 1834. Looks like, I think it only is like 30 years old, but that would fit in that time period. And then lo and behold, the second one that I went over here, this is also Elizabeth. Elizabeth Shank. So anyways, I sort of figured I wanted to come to a cemetery to tell this story. There's a couple more. A lot of them are in German, but I want to give a little backstory because we talk about like witches and that type of thing, and there was something that people did get accused of. Salem witch trials here in America is what's the most prevalent, because they're actually being a trial and because a number of them actually being hung. It did happen. Now, whether those people were witchcraft or not is definitely up for debate. In the Salem witch trials, it sounds like it was pretty much just a vindictive young teenager who accused these women who weren't putting up with her shenanigans and accused them of being witches. And then, there was a little bit of religious, well, quite a bit of religious zealotry that went on, and without actual proof. And probably in a lot of those cases, now in the medieval ages is a little different. When people got accused of witchcraft, usually it was a woman that was of a strong opinion, probably a scientific woman, and the church didn't like that back then. So the easiest way to take somebody out was to discredit them by saying that they were a witch, and then you could also kill them, whether it was burning them at the stake or whatever they did. That was their way of dealing with the problem. In more current days, you would have a lot of these women were healers, if you will. Like, they were natural, like, medicine type people. And so they would bring a lot of that stuff over because, you had quite a bit of the German populace that came over. Yeah, a lot of them were religious, like Lutheran or Reformed, Moravian or something of that nature. But there were a lot that were pagan, and they brought a lot of their pagan stories and their pagan beliefs over with them. And I believe we have another, it's Eliza, that's probably short for Elizabeth. But they would bring these ways of healing over with them. Had nothing to do with witchcraft, it just had to do with nature and that type of stuff. And then I would assume a lot of them, when they came over here, because a lot of the herbs and the natural medicines probably wouldn't be the same, because you wouldn't have the same things as you had over in Europe. So they probably conferred with Native Americans, because the Native Americans did much the same thing, where it was the natural medicines and those types of things, and they would use that to take care of people. But with the thing that was cool about this, well, it wasn't cool, but like back then, they had, if you were accused of being a witch, you had to be convicted. A lot of times they would not allow you to be buried in a normal cemetery, because they were afraid your evil spirit would haunt the cemetery and mess with the peace of your loved ones. So, but the fact that these 7 women were actually then buried in this cemetery says that, the community viewed them as not actually being witches. And probably in a lot of ways, like, these women were usually probably like recluse, a little more odd, so the community probably wasn't like trying to hang out with them, but they still, probably a lot of them appreciated when they had a moment where they needed help, and that person probably helped somebody in their family with their natural medicines, or whatever, the folklores, the old wives' tales, those types of things. They did appreciate that. So in a way, maybe standoffish in a way, they defended them and made sure that they were still buried amongst their friends. So it sort of makes me think that that's probably what it is, that these were individuals that, somebody decided to be a religious zealot or something of that nature. And it's not a rip on religion, it's just the nature of how things were back then. They decided to, I'm going to accuse these people of being witches, but they never got convicted of it. So most likely they were pagans, just sort of normal people that came over from Germany and were continuing to observe their heritage and how they were raised and their natural healing methods, and using herbs and whatever that they had at their disposal to take care of illnesses, and using those natural remedies. A lot of those things we've probably forgotten, which is a shame, because I think a lot of times we have natural remedies that pretty much everything. But there's also a story about this with the 7 Elizabeths, which there is not a wall around here. And who knows whether there actually was ever a wall here. Maybe around the original older cemetery here from that time period there was a wall at some point, but now there obviously is not. And there is also a church here, which I believe at the time it was more of a community cemetery from back then. I'd have to do a little more research on that, but from what I know of this place, this has always been sort of a community cemetery and not associated with just one church or the other. They do say that if you walk around the wall 3 times, that the spirits of these Elizabeths will push you. Now, once again, whether any of that's true or not, who knows? But it is a cool story that you'd actually have 7 women named Elizabeth, all in the same rough time period, probably like 30 years or so, that were accused of witchcraft, when in fact most likely it was something as simple as them bringing over their abilities and their talents to heal and help the community. And because people didn't necessarily always understand that, and you have sort of this idea of magic or whatever it is, and then they decide, oh, this person must be a witch, they must be in league with Satan or something of that nature. And it's just simply most likely, and I would say highly likely in this case, that it's not the case. So I thought it'd be a cool story to share with you guys, to talk about this. You know, it was cool actually seeing a couple of these stones, that I believe 3 of them that I saw just a little bit. I walked around here with Elizabeth on them. But whether this is the actual cemetery or not, if it is actually more towards Harrisburg, between Hershey and Middletown, then it's probably there's a couple cemeteries in the Hummelstown region that are of that age, but you're just sort of limited because of the age that it would have to be, and the size to actually have 7 Elizabeths of that time period. It has to be a cemetery that's of a reasonable size and a reasonable age. So that's the reason I came out here. And like I said, I'm not giving a name just simply because I don't want to draw attention to a place that it doesn't deserve to get, because this very well may not be the place. But with the research I did, it sort of assumed that it was. But with that, I am going to head out because it is cold. It's in the 30s right now. This is the day before Thanksgiving, and I'm going to be putting out a video tomorrow that's going to be a little different than what I normally do, just talking about being thankful. And I don't want to I say sappy, but it's not. It's like when you go through sort of a life-changing year like this, it makes you think. Makes you think a little bit more than you had in the past. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then Friday we'll get back to our normal videos. I want to try to go out to a few other places, start showing you guys some pretty cool places, and then maybe by this weekend I would like to get that Milton Hershey video done. So once again, thank you everybody, and we will see you all about town.